Inside the penthouse on the 56th floor, overlooking all of Manhattan, Julian Westfield stood silently by the glass window, holding a glass of expensive whiskey, his cold eyes reflecting the city lights. His perfectly tailored gray suit hugged the frame of a seasoned, successful, and calculating man. On the marble table lay an open wedding invitation, gilded with gold edges reading, "Julian Westfield and Khloe Ashford cordially invite." At the bottom was the name that made Julian's lips curl into a cold smile, Arielle Thompson. 3 years ago, Ariel had left Julian's life without looking back, when he had nothing but ambition. She had once been the only one who saw the real man inside him, and the only one who ever made him feel like he wasn't enough. Since then, Julian has become one of the most powerful investors on Wall Street, owning Westfield Capital, with assets worth billions of dollars. But no amount of money could smother the smoldering anger within. He wasn't inviting Arielle to the wedding to make peace. He was inviting her for revenge, to show her what she had walked away from. He now held them in his hands to let her feel what being outside the perfect world was like. Julian gestured to his assistant Kyle, who stood waiting by the door. "Send this invitation to Arielle Thompson, hand-delivered, and make sure the courier sees her take it in her own hands." Kyle hesitated. "Are you sure about this, Julian? Inviting your ex to your wedding is—" Julian turned around, his gaze sharp as a blade. "I've never been more sure." A soft breeze brushed against the window pane. Outside, the city still glowed brightly. But in Julian's eyes, it wasn't the light of happiness. It was the fire of a reckoning wrapped in wine and wedding flowers. In a quiet little house in Brooklyn, where the morning light streamed through pale striped curtains, Arielle Thompson sat sketching in the corner of her living room, her hand gliding gently across an unfinished canvas. Her life now, though simple, was peaceful, with a small art studio, loyal students, and a private world, untouched by wealth or ambition. Suddenly the doorbell rang. She got up to open it and was met by a courier in a neatly tailored suit. Not the usual kind of delivery. "Delivery for Miss Arielle Thompson," he said, bowing respectfully as he handed over a thick envelope, carefully sealed with red wax, bearing the emblem W, the symbol of Westfield Capital. Ariel frowned, took it, and opened it. "Julian Westfield and Khloe Ashford cordially invite you to their wedding at Longwood Estate." Her hand trembled slightly. A current of memories surged through her like an undertow, nights spent together on park benches, when Julian had nothing, the fiery arguments over ethics and ambition, and the final day she walked away when he chose power over her. She looked back at the invitation. It was deliberate. This wasn't a casual gesture. This was a message. A trap. She could have thrown it into the trash, but instead her hand placed it gently on the table. Inside Arielle, it wasn't curiosity she felt, but something more profound, the certainty that she was no longer the wounded girl from the past. Arielle took a deep breath, picked up her phone, and booked a flight to Westchester. "I'm not coming to be part of your game, Julian," she whispered. "I'm coming to remind you who let go first." She turned back to her unfinished canvas and added a bold stroke to the horizon, her first mark in a brand new chapter of her own. Longwood Estate, a grand manor, nestled within a European-style garden, lined with swan-shaped hedges, and white marble fountains gleamed under the golden afternoon light. Guests stepped out of limousines and entered the grand hall, where the pre-wedding cocktail party was in full swing. In a custom-tailored silver-gray suit, Julian Westfield stood in the crowd with a sculpted, perfect smile, but his eyes kept glancing toward the entrance. He was waiting for something, or rather someone. When Arielle Thompson arrived, she entered in a form-fitting moss-green silk dress, simple yet elegant. She didn't smile or flaunt herself, but every step carried a presence that momentarily made the room pause. Whispers spread instantly. "Is that her Julian's ex? the one who left him when he was still a nobody. Was she invited, or did she crash the party? Julian saw her, and in that instant, all the years of power, the million-dollar meetings, the designer suits meant nothing, because her gaze was just as it had been back then, calm, sharp, and unafraid. "I didn't think you'd come," Julian said, as he approached her, voice low and deep. Ariel smiled softly, eyes unblinking. "If I didn't come, how would you get to show off how successful you've become?" Before Julian could respond, Khloe Ashford, the bride-to-be, arrived gently, linking her arm through Julian's with sugary affection. "Will you introduce us, darling?" Her voice was light, but the look in her eyes carried a distinct edge. Julian hesitated for a beat. "This is Arielle Thompson, an old acquaintance, very old." Ariel added, her eyes never leaving Julian's, but the memories still fresh. Khloe forced a smile, her grip tightening on Julian's arm. "Well then, I hope you enjoy the evening, and keep everything in the past." Ariel responded with a smile laced with meaning. "Only if the past doesn't come up to greet me first." The whole room seemed to tighten after those words. Julian suddenly caught between two worlds, one of reputation carefully built, and another of a past that refused to die, began to realize that this revenge wouldn't be as simple as he'd imagined. The party continued, but all eyes stayed on the three of them like waiting for a storm, and everyone knew it was coming. Crystal chandeliers cast their glow down on a long banquet table, draped in white linen, embroidered with gold lace. The soft clinking of silverware against porcelain echoed gently elegant, yet as cold as the atmosphere slowly freezing among the three people seated at the head of the table. Julian sat between Khloe and Ariel, on one side, the orchestrated future. On the other, the unresolved past. Glamorous conversations about investments, stock markets, and billion-dollar deals floated around between the guests. But at the center of it all, no one heard anything except Khloe's heavy breathing and Julian's uneasy glances whenever his eyes accidentally met Ariel's. Khloe leaned in, whispering into Julian's ear with a strained smile. "I just don't understand. Why would you invite her?" Julian clenched his wine glass, his voice low but tight. Just a gesture of courtesy. Nothing more. Khloe gave a faint smile and turned back to the table. But Ariel, sitting across from them, caught every word, every glance, every pregnant pause between the two. As the main course was served, Ariel suddenly spoke, her tone light as air. "I still remember the first time you made this dish for me. In that old apartment, tiny kitchen, cheap wine. But you once said, 'Love is the main course, flavor is secondary.'" The entire table stilled. Julian looked up, his eyes locking with Ariel's. Not with blame nor pain, but with a reminder. Khloe placed her utensils down gracefully, but with unmistakable firmness. "I thought this was my favorite dish, Julian." Julian opened his mouth to respond, but Ariel had already curled her lips into a faint smirk. Perhaps his taste changes, depending on who's at the table. Silence fell. The string quartet in the corner continued playing, but the music somehow felt offbeat. A nearby guest murmured, "Looks like Julian's past and present just collided." Khloe stood and raised her wine glass. "Well then, let's toast to the past, the present, and hope the future doesn't get confused." The table responded with polite, uneasy laughter and clinking glasses. But in Julian's eyes, the only thing he could see was the unraveling of his entire plan. Ariel hadn't crumbled. Khloe had begun to suspect, and Julian realized the storm hadn't arrived yet, but the sky was already black with clouds. Dinner ended in a delicate awkwardness. Khloe excused herself, citing fatigue, leaving Julian alone in a lavish and cold setting as a crystal mask. Ariel stepped out onto the rear terrace. The garden was aglow with hundreds of floating paper lanterns, suspended like stranded stars. She stood silently before the fountain, her fingers gently brushing the small beaded necklace around her neck, a gift Julian had once given her. Behind her, footsteps echoed. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Julian stopped a few steps away. You always knew how to fill a space, even without saying a word. Arielle turned the moonlight falling across her eyes, like it reflected a sorrow too deep to name. And you always knew how to break the silence, just as it was about to find peace. Julian exhaled, his voice hoarse from everything unsaid. Did you come here for revenge? No. Arielle lifted her head unflinching. I came to remember why I left, and to see if you were pleased without me. Silence. A breeze moved gently through the trees, causing the lanterns to flicker across the water. Julian stepped closer, so close, only the breath between them remained. Happiness. He laughed dry and hollow. Do you think a lavish party, a $1 million wedding, could fill what you left behind? Arielle looked him in the eyes. The thing is, I didn't leave anything behind, Julian. I took the best part of you with me, the part you buried to become the man Wall Street admires, but no one genuinely loves. That sentence struck deep into the part of Julian he'd never dared to confront. He reached out, wanting to touch her shoulder, but his hand stopped mid-air. Would you have come if I hadn't sent the invitation? Arielle looked down, a brief smile flickering across her lips like the last ember of light in the night. No, but if you hadn't, maybe we would have kept living a lie. Music drifted from the grand hall, signaling the engagement celebration was about to resume. But neither of them moved. They stood there like survivors of a storm, breathing in sync, carrying wounds that no longer bled. And for the first time in years, Julian was no longer sure what was right or what had already been lost. The party carried on with a flawless appearance. Guests raised their glasses in celebration. The orchestra played elegant symphonies, and Khloe beamed beside her fiancé, as if everything unfolded exactly as destiny intended. But in a quiet corner of the room, Julian's gaze drifted toward Arielle, who was now chatting with a small group of guests, though her eyes occasionally swept back toward him, like an arrow that never needed to be fired to hit its mark. At that moment, Logan, Julian's closest friend, approached. He wasn't one to meddle in anyone's love life, but tonight, something different filled his eyes. He stood calmly beside Julian, with no drink in hand, or no smile on his face. What are you doing, Julian? Logan asked, his voice soft but resolute. Julian didn't turn his head, his eyes still locked on Arielle. Doing what's right, marrying someone suitable, building a solid future. Logan scoffed lightly and shook his head. No, you're trying to bury your past with an expensive ceremony. And trust me, it won't work. You might fool everyone else, but you can't fool your own eyes. Julian's grip tightened around his wine glass. You don't understand, Logan. She left me. She chose an ordinary life, a cheap neighborhood over everything I've worked so hard to build. Logan turned fully to face him now. This time, there was nothing gentle in his voice. Did you ever ask what she had to give up just to stay true to herself? Or do you only count losses in dollars and square footage? Julian froze. You can marry Khloe, live a picture-perfect life, Logan continued. But the part of you that Arielle once loved, that real part of you, it'll die a little more each time you look in the mirror and see a man who no longer lives by his heart. Short and cutting sentences struck deeper than any contract Julian had ever signed. He turned away, but not fast enough to hide the flicker of unease in his eyes. Logan stepped back, a sad look on his own. I'm not saying this to stop you. I hope, when the time comes to choose, if there's still time, you won't choose the wrong person just because you're too scared to face your real pain. Applause erupted from the main hall, signaling the start of the evening speeches. But in Julian's mind, voices began collating Logan's words. Ariel's gaze and Khloe's dazzling yet hollow smile. Everything had begun to crack. In the bridal suite, adorned with ivory silk ribbons and roses, Khloe Montgomery, the esteemed bride and heiress to the Montgomery media empire, sat before the mirror, her luxurious wedding gown cascading around her feet. Everything was perfect, her flawless makeup, pearl-studded hairstyle elegant, and gaze seemingly lost somewhere far away. A soft knock echoed on the door. Khloe turned. "Come in." Celeste, Khloe's cousin and maid of honor, entered, a look of unease on her face. In her hand was a phone, the screen still lit up. "Khloe, you need to see this." Khloe frowned. "What is it?" Celeste hesitated for a few seconds, then handed her the phone. On the screen played a short video that had just gone viral on social media. The footage showed Arielle stepping out of a car at the wedding venue, wearing a striking green silk dress, holding a small clutch, and smiling confidently like she belonged there. At the same time, a voiceover rang out from the video. The groom's ex-girlfriend shows up at the $1 million wedding. Drama unfolds. Khloe froze. Her face turned pale. "Who is she?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Celeste lowered her eyes. "Julian's ex, the one he's never talked about, but never really let go of." Khloe gasped, placing the phone on the table, struggling to stay composed. "Is that why he was so distracted all evening yesterday?" Celeste nodded slowly. "He invited her." Khloe asked again, this time with a mix of anger and confusion. "Not sure. But it seems like everyone here is talking about it." Khloe stood and walked to the mirror, staring intensely at her reflection. "I've done everything right. The right family, the right image, the right duty. But Julian, if he's still living with the ghost of his past." She turned, her eyes glassy, but her voice steady and proud. "Then I refuse to be a replacement in my wedding." Celeste stepped forward and held Khloe's hand. "So what are you going to do?" Khloe swallowed hard, regaining her composure. "I'm not running. I'll face this. In front of everyone, in front of him." Meanwhile, Julian could feel every eye slowly turning toward him in the hall. But not from the guests. From Arielle. From Khloe. From the past and the present. A confrontation he could no longer avoid was waiting for him at the end of the aisle. Music drifted gently through the air. White ribbons fluttered softly in the breeze across the grand wedding venue. Guests were all seated, their eyes fixed at the end of the flower-lined aisle. Every gaze, every breath seemed to pause. In a sleek black tuxedo, Julian Whitaker stood at the altar where the officiant was waiting. But instead of steadiness, his heart pounded wildly. His eyes almost unconsciously scanned the rows, searching for her. And then he saw Ariel, silent, seated in the second row, her green dress cutting through the sea of white like a blade. Her gaze didn't flinch. She looked straight at him, calm, not angry, not jealous, but knowing. The music shifted key. The doors at the far end opened. Khloe Montgomery entered. In her magnificent gown, flowing like a queen's, she looked like the perfect image the media had always hoped for. But only Julian could see. Her steps were not entirely steady. Her smiling eyes carried a trace of doubt. She walked toward him, step by step. The officiant began the vows. Julian held Khloe's hand, but once again his eyes found Ariel, the only woman who had ever loved him, without ambition, without company, shares, without headlines. Just him. Officiant Julian Whitaker. "Do you take—" Silence. No one breathed. Khloe looked at Julian as if trying to pull his mind back into the moment. But his eyes were filled with torment. At last he took a deep breath, gently squeezed Khloe's hand, and then let go. Julian, I'm sorry. A ripple of whispers surged through the seated guests. Julian turned, looked directly at Ariel, and then looked around at everyone. I can't keep living as the image I created. I invited the woman who once loved me here to prove I'd moved on, but the truth is, I never did. And I can't begin a new life on a foundation built on lies. Khloe froze. Gasps rang out. Cameras flashed furiously. Perfection shattered in an instant. Julian bowed his head to Khloe. You don't deserve to be hurt like this, and I'm sorry. Without waiting for anyone to respond, he stepped away from the altar, leaving behind the spotlight, the whispers, the expectations, and a carefully crafted future. To seek something real. Behind him, Ariel remained seated. She didn't run after him. She didn't smile. But in her eyes for the first time, a single glistening tear slipped quietly down. The doors of the wedding hall had barely closed behind Julian Whitaker when everything inside seemed to erupt. The media cameras initially invited to capture the fairy tale moments of a $1 million wedding now record every second of a disaster. Khloe Montgomery stood at the altar, her face pale as a sheet. She didn't cry or scream, just froze like a marble statue. Her parents, representatives of one of the most potent financial families in the Northeast, rushed to her side, supporting their daughter while shooting daggers at Ariel with eyes that looked ready to burn her alive. Mr. Montgomery barked at the wedding coordinator. Shut down all cameras. Immediately. Outside, Julian stood alone in the garden. No paparazzi, no assistants, no one. Only the sound of birds and the early summer breeze rustling through the leaves. His designer tuxedo now felt excessive, heavier than the mask he had worn for years. Ariel stepped out. She didn't run. She didn't rush. She walked on the same steady legs that once learned how to live without him, now carrying her slowly back toward him. Julian turned. They faced each other in silence. No spotlight, no audience, just two bare souls with memories and choices between them. Julian, I don't know where to start. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Ariel, then what are you asking for? Julian looked at her, voice raw with emotion. I just want, for the first time in my life, to live truthfully. Not for my parents, not for the board, not for the press, just for me. Ariel held back a breath. Julian, you just hurt a woman. At your wedding. Do you think that's living truthfully? He bowed his head. No. I think it's the price I'm paying for the lie I've fed for too long. Silence. A soft breeze swept through the white drapes still hanging from the wedding arch. A single petal fell between them, like the final period on a long sentence. Ariel, then start. Face everything not for me, but for yourself. Julian nodded. No promises, no pleading. Just one reply: I will. In the distance, media outlets had already begun broadcasting. CEO Julian Whitaker walks out on wedding. Ex-lover's appearance sparks scandal. At that moment, Julian's old world began to crumble. But in his eyes, a new one was slowly being born. News of Julian Whitaker's canceled wedding spread like wildfire in the summer wind. Tabloids screamed headlines. $1 million CEO, Julian leaves. Bride at the altar for disabled Black ex-Montgomery family. Cancels. $700 mbo. Merger deal with Whitaker Capital. After wedding disaster. Within just 48 hours, Julian lost his seat on 3 corporate boards. Whitaker Capital's stock dropped 12%, and his inbox exploded with emails from lawyers, investors, and his mother. But Julian sat still in his penthouse, leaving the world outside the glass windows, the world that once suffocated him. No alcohol, no assistance, no press statement. Only one thing kept his grip on sanity: a planned meeting with Ariel at a small cafe the next morning. Corner cafe. No media. No cameras. Ariel sat waiting, slowly swirling a cup of mint tea that had long gone cold. She didn't know if Julian would come. She didn't hope. She no longer dreamed. The door opened. Julian walked in. No tuxedo. No flashy CEO aura. Just a man, lost, uncertain, but real. He sat down across from her. "Julian, I'm not asking you to come back. I want to apologize for the first time without pretending to be strong." Ariel looked at him for a long moment, then nodded gently. "Then say it." Julian inhaled deeply, as if summoning every ounce of courage to face the woman he once deemed too unfit for his world. "Julian, that day, when your accident happened, I was scared. I was scared of society's pity, scared the board would think I was crazy for loving a woman in a wheelchair. So I turned fear into coldness." He lowered his head. "But yesterday, standing at that altar, watching you walk in still strong like the first day I met you, I realized you were the one who stood tall. And I never knew how to stand on my own. No tears, no theatrics, just silence and truth." Ariel responded slowly. "Julian, you think you can shed everything in one morning? Do you even realize how much you've destroyed, Julian? I do. And I'm not asking you to carry any of it. But if I don't start changing today, I'll spend my life as a man in a suit living a name someone else gave me." Ariel stood, picking up her bag. "Ariel, no one can teach you how to be real, Julian. That's something you have to learn for yourself. And don't start by using me as your reason." She walked toward the door. But as her hand touched the handle, she paused without turning back. "Ariel, but if one day you truly find yourself, I'll listen." Julian remained seated in silence. No promises. There is no fairy tale ending, only a path beginning to open, rugged and uncertain, but one he could finally call his own. A week later, the offices of Whitaker Capital were no longer a fortress of power. They had become a battleground of public opinion. The board of directors held an emergency meeting. Partners pulled out. The press unearthed every scrap of gossip about Julian, the man who left his bride for a disabled black ex-lover. The Montgomery family sued for breach of prenuptial agreement and financial damages, demanding $85 million in compensation. It seemed the world was ready to bury Julian beneath the concrete of a ruined reputation. But he did not run. At the Whitaker Capital boardroom, Julian entered facing 12 people who once bowed to his decisions, now staring at him suspiciously. Linda, the PR director, spoke first. "You've caused serious damage to the company's image. We need an explanation and a plan to fix this crisis." Julian didn't argue. He nodded, his gaze steady and honest. "Julian, you're right. I've spent years playing the role of a man who couldn't be wrong. But my biggest mistake was staying in that role for too long." The room fell silent. From his suit pocket, he pulled out a document. It wasn't a PR campaign. It wasn't a new investment pitch. It was the proposal for a startup fund for people with disabilities, the Ariel Initiative. "Julian, we invest billions every year chasing profit. But I'm committing the first 10 million to those society refuses to invest people with disabilities the left behind. Not for reputation, but because it's time we do what's right." The media exploded. At first, skeptical headlines emerged. Redemption PR stunt, or genuine turning point. But soon, real faces came to light. A paralyzed mother funded the opening of a bakery. A blind painter was awarded a scholarship to study art. A group of wheelchair-using students launching an app for urban accessibility. Ariel saw it all through emails, the news, social media. She said nothing, but something within her began to stir. Once a powerful CEO, Julian was becoming a man who learned to listen. No more sound bites, like I'm successful because I outperform everyone. Now he sat in quiet meetings taking notes and admitting mistakes. He attended conferences on the invisible barriers faced by people with disabilities in business. Sitting in the back row, no spotlight, he began to live as a real human being. One day, Ariel received a package. No flowers, no card, just a notebook. Navy blue cover, simple. Inside were 3 handwritten words, I'm still learning. One March morning, in a small Brooklyn cafe, the kind of place where people tired of appearances came to find truth in the sound of dripping coffee and faded jazz. The door creaked open. Julian Whitaker walked in. No tailored suit, just rolled up linen sleeves, slightly tousled hair, and clear, steady eyes. Arielle was already there. She turned to look at him. No smile, no blame, just a nod, and a deep breath, like setting down a burden she'd carried far too long. Julian sat across from her. I don't know where to begin, he said, his voice low and honest. Arielle didn't rush him. She stirred her cappuccino. Then start with why you asked me here. He looked at her. None of the arrogance from before, remained only sincerity. I once used you as a bet. Then I loved you, but I was too afraid to admit it. Afraid of everything you represented: difference, vulnerability, and truth. Arielle looked at him, her gaze softening, but still guarded. And now I know. You're not something I needed to overcome. You're someone I need to learn how to protect, not out of guilt, but because you deserve it. The space fell quiet. Outside the window, early spring snow fell gently like a whisper. Arielle placed her hand on the table close to his, not touching. Julian, I don't need you to be a hero. I need you to be honest, with yourself and with me, always. He nodded slowly. I don't have grand promises, but I have a long plan, and I want you to know if one day you're ready, just come back here. There'll always be a seat next to me. She smiled, not dazzling, but the deepest smile since the day they parted. Arielle stood up. Then keep that seat. As for me, I'll consider the invitation. 3 months later, at a community center, a new sign was unveiled: Ariel House, a place to cultivate strength for people with disabilities. Primary sponsor, Whitaker Foundation. Julian stood at the back of the event. No stage, no speech. Ariel took the mic. The man who once looked down on me for being in a wheelchair, today helped build a home for hundreds like me. I say this not to praise him, but to remind us that people can change, and that love, if it's real, must learn how to grow. Final scene. Julian left first. On a bench near the exit, a new notebook rested with a handwritten line. The promise still stands. Ariel watched him go. This time, no doubt. Only hope. Past mistakes don't define us forever, but we only truly change when we're brave enough to love without needing to win.